Markets are absolutely ripping today after the potential Fed pivot. Let's get into this article from CNBC. So, Fed chair says smaller interest rate hikes could start in December. What does he mean by that? Thus, it makes sense to moderate the pace of our rate increases as we approach the level of restraint that will be sufficient to bring down inflation. He added, the time for moderating the pace of rate increases may come as soon as the December meeting. So, what is Jerome Powell saying? He is saying there's a chance in December and January that we are going to lower the rate of our interest rate hikes. This is potentially dovish for the stock market, which is why we see a 4.5% increase on the NASDAQ on the day. But is this a smoking gun, or is this actually a Fed pivot? And what does a Fed pivot look like? Right now, the Fed is simply saying that they are going to slow the rate of interest rate hikes. So right now, if they maybe instead of doing 75, if they do 50 basis points or 25, they're still raising rates. It's just slower. And we're still having to absorb much higher interest rates than we did a few years ago with astronomical amounts of debt, and they're not stopping QT. They're just slowing rate hikes. So they're still going to be dumping a bunch of bonds and mortgages onto the market. So I think this is much more of a smoking gun. Why the market is up just gets kind of giddy on fake news.
A particular interest to me, Josh, was the concept of the lag in timing. Musk actually, out of all people, weighed in on this earlier today. So earlier today, Musk tweeted, trend is concerning. Fed needs to cut interest rates immediately. They are massively amplifying the probability of a severe recession. More on that in a second. But there were two replies, and I'll read those two real quick as well. Ironically, this is the replies. Ironically, the Fed continues to project positive GDP growth for next year, despite all the obvious signs. But they did the same thing in 2008. As always, they will panic cut rates once the recession impact is here and then blame unforeseen factors. The Fed stayed too easy for too long, totally misreading inflation. And now they've tightened aggressively into the highest debt construct ever without accounting for the lag effects. And that's the key thing, lag effects of these rate hikes, risking that they'll be late again to realize the damage they've done, at which point Musk responded exactly. And so what I found, the thing on that front is that if that is true, then there is an argument that I'm sympathetic to, that the damage essentially has already been done. Not to go too off topic in this video, but if this is what did kick off the dollar milkshake theory, and that has sucked in liquidity from the rest of the world. The suction of liquidity, in a sense, has already happened.
Well, Justin, this could potentially be Elon saying that his liquidity is being sucked out as well. I mean, if you kind of think about it, Elon's net worth is almost entirely around Tesla's stock price. That's where he has pretty much everything. So he bought Twitter by selling Tesla stock price. All of his other companies are a result of Tesla's stock price. What happens when the Fed is tightening through a variety of psychological maneuvers that brings stocks down? Hypothetically, that's what we are seeing. So Tesla's stock price is coming down pretty substantially. And I mean, with that, he's probably seeing, oh my God, my profits, my revenue, they are down substantially. Our volumes, they are getting crushed. Our stock price is tanking. This cannot go on much longer. So as we can see, the stock market is ripping on hopes that the Fed is going to slow down their pace of rate increases, but they're still raising rates. This is where you kind of get to the Twitter thread, where it's most likely the Fed is going to have to do a complete 180 pivot. But where does that pivot lay? Does it lay when the market is down 20% from all-time highs and there's just inflation still at 6, 7, 8%? Or is it going to lie when we see this flash crash type scenario where there's severe liquidity and companies are going bankrupt left and right? I would assume it would be much more the latter, because that is potentially the Fed's actual goal. They want to crush inflation by reducing demand as much as possible.
Yeah. And also in that thing is the definition of what is a pivot. Is a pivot just, let's say, maybe only doing a 10 basis point hike as opposed to a 25 or 50 or even 75 basis point hike? Yeah. I mean, like, so that's the question. Like, how would you define how would the market define and perceive a pivot, or at least the first phase of a pivot?
And the economy, can the economy handle an additional 50 basis points? Let's say they do 25, and will we be able to kind of have this new realm of interest rates, call it 4.5%? Will we be able to handle that for the next 5 years? I would argue probably not. So at what point do we have to backtrack? And I don't think we're going to backtrack by going down. Oh, the Fed's going to cut by 50. They're going to cut by 25. They're going to cut by 75. If they're going to have to slash all the way down to zero because something breaks, when will something break? Who knows? But should the market be rallying up 4.5% on just a potential smoking gun because the Fed's still going to raise rates and they're not going to be doing anything pretty substantial? Personally, I don't think so. Justin, do you do anything with your portfolio? Because if you don't know, over the past few weeks, I've been building back up an additional short position. The last time I talked, I think I said I opened a third of my position. I really wanted to see where the market would go because I'd love to add on to that position substantially, and I would love to go mega short the market right now. And since then, since those past few weeks, I've increased my position a lot. I'm probably 8/10 of the way where I want to be. So I'm significantly short the NASDAQ all through puts, and then a few motor companies that were just EV companies that were just completely garbage, that didn't produce any cars. They have no profit, and they probably will never profit. And I think they're most likely going to go bankrupt. But that's also my own bias.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so I haven't really done much with my portfolio in that, but I do have a suspicion on how the on the next part of the market to break, but that's for another video. So,
do you guys think the Fed is pivoting? Thanks.